Hey everybody, welcome back to Drew the Catholic. Today we have a really exciting episode, an interview with Dr. Brian Engelland, and he is a professor emeritus of business and marketing at the Catholic University of America. I found Dr. Engelland by reading his book, A Force for Good, because I have a business of my own, and as we were starting our business, we were looking for ways to integrate our faith into everything we do. This was the first book I found. I loved it. It was great. It's really formed a lot of the decisions we've made about how we've formed our business, how we think through the value we offer to our clients and things like that. So I kind of had the idea, let's just email Dr. Brian and see if we can bring him on to talk about this. So I have him on the show today. Let's go ahead and bring him on. Dr. Brian, how are you?
Very good today. Very
Good,
good.
good. Great to have you on. Thanks so much for coming on the show and just agreeing to be a part of my crazy little podcast project. Tell us a little bit about your background in business as a professor and things like that, just so people can kind of know what your background and expertise is.
Well, certainly. So I started out as an engineer because I was always fascinated with how things go together. And very quickly, I worked myself into new product development for a major company that was in the plastics industry. Ended up being involved in the development of over 300 new products and services. Got really interested in marketing, became a marketing executive and then a market research consultant. And then I suddenly saw the light after about 22 years of business that I wanted to help other people. And I went back, got my PhD in business, became a business and marketing professor, worked for 3 institutions. So at any rate, God really blessed my career, I think, in terms of giving me some distinctive experiences. And I think that the bottom line is all the way through here, I've always been concerned about doing the right thing, doing things well. And I suppose this has to do with the fact that I have been a Catholic all my life, and I realize that God has given all of us with certain talents and abilities, and by golly, we'll be able to use those talents and abilities to do something that He wants to have done. And I remember one incident that when I was a young man, a teenager, working for my dad. My dad had a heating and cooling business, residential heating and cooling business. And I remember going out on a service call with him, and I was the guy that would carry the tools in as he was doing work. And it was a situation where wintertime, cold, and somebody's furnace wasn't working.
Oh, wow.
So my dad figured out what was wrong with it and told the owner, okay, all I got to do is replace this one part, and then you're good to go. And the man said, well, I'd like to have a price to replace the entire furnace and air conditioning system for the house. And my dad says, well, you don't need one. What you got is going to last another 15 years. You're going to be in great shape. And the guy insisted, no, I said, I'd like to get a new one, brand new. I want everything to stop for the line. And my dad refused to give him because you don't need it.
Oh, wow.
Give him. And I remember then asking my dad as we went home, I said, Dad, I know, I mean, here's an opportunity to sell a whole big unit. You're going to make a lot of money on that. Why would you tell somebody that you're not even going to give them a price? And my dad said, Brian, it's wrong to sell somebody something that they don't need. And I thought about that, and it's true. If you sell somebody something they don't need, they're wasting the money that they have available that God's given them to invest in things and do things. I think my dad mentioned, well, the guy could use this to educate his children. He could take his wife on vacation. There's so many better uses than to invest it in a mechanical system that he doesn't need because he's got one that's going to provide all of the services necessary. And I think throughout my life, I was going back to that incident and always wanted to say, well, what is the right thing here?
Right.
Especially in the terms of marketing, and maybe we'll get into the discussion sometime during our interview, because in marketing, it's all about providing good service to people and helping them make good decisions. And if we start trying to help them make bad decisions by investing in things that they don't really need, then we're probably taking them in the wrong direction, and probably not giving glory to God like we would like to as Christians and as Catholics.
Yeah. No, I think that's really, really interesting. And thanks for sharing that story. That, every salesman in the room hears that and goes, no, you've missed an opportunity and the guy even wanted it. But I think what you bring up is an excellent point that, as professionals, we have the industry that we're in, the expertise that we have. And I know for me in video production, a lot of times when we're talking with people, they don't really know what it takes to make a video. They don't know what makes a good video, what makes an effective video. And so, in a sense, as a video production professional, right, just like with your father as a repairman, and knowing how to work on those things, it's his job to relay what they actually need versus what they don't, and not take advantage of someone's lack of knowledge, which I think is typical in terms of people's expectations with like the car mechanic, right? You go to the mechanic and they say you need basically a whole new car and it's going to cost this many thousands of dollars when all you really needed to was, to replace the air filter maybe. But as business professionals, if we can build trust through that type of relationship, he probably earned, a lifetime client out of that interaction with that person knowing, hey, this is someone who's actually got my best interest in mind. They're not just trying to make a quick buck, but he actually, negated a sale that could have been profitable for the sake of, not replacing something that didn't need to be replaced.
Well, I think there's two aspects. You're correct. Probably my dad, well, he did develop an excellent reputation for good business and sound business and trust in the community. And people knew that when they dealt with my dad, they were going to get, good value for their dollar. They weren't going to get something that they didn't need. And I think that kind of develops word of mouth, which is very important in any marketing effort, and
Right.
it helps repeat business.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that this is the reason that you do it,
It's not, yeah, right,
so that you make more money along range. No,
right,
the reason you do it is because it's the right thing to do.
absolutely.
I think in my career, I've always tried to talk about the ethical way to do things. And I remember for quite a bit of my college career teaching students the right way to do things from an ethical standpoint. And I did this at a public university initially, and it's very difficult at a public university to talk about God, and it's
Mm-hmm.
very difficult to talk about death, judgment, heaven and hell. They say, wait a minute, we don't want to know anything about religion here. But you have to have that as a perspective if you're
Mm-hmm.
going to really understand what is ethical and what's
Mm-hmm.
not ethical. If you take God out of the equation and only look at the world,
Mm-hmm.
then right and wrong basically is determined by what you can get away with,
Right.
what keep you out of jail. And that's a very limited understanding of what is right and wrong.
And
We
that
need,
definitely seems to be the pervasive opinion if you look at Wall Street and look at some of the bigger firms and some of the
yeah,
fines they get slapped with. It just amazes me that you see, like the SEC will slap someone with a couple $100 million fine and they pay it like it was, just pocket change for doing something pretty egregious. And that's all that happens. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. Interesting. Well, I think that kind of brings us into something I wanted to ask. I think for a lot of Catholics and even just Christians in general, we look at the way the business world might be or might have been. It seems like it might be changing a little. And then we look at the faith, and it seems as though a lot of people's response to that has been sort of to, bifurcate their life. If they're in business, here's how we do business. And then we have our faith sort of on Sunday. And what you're advocating for, which I think is right in line with the social teaching of the church, is that those should actually be integrated. And business is, as you talk about in your book, sort of a vocation, a calling to serve people. So how could we, and as Catholics, you know, integrate those things and start to view them as connected and interrelated as opposed to, just two separate parts of our life?
St. John Paul II talked about this as the divided life, living the divided life, where on Sundays you're the perfect Christian,
Yeah.
yeah, and doing all of the good things, and then you throw that all out the window when you get to work on
Yeah.
Monday, and basically you live the whole world, or sorry, every day as a secularist.
Hmm.
Um, and you're right. This is troublesome, and it's a big problem. It's a problem because it makes you dual personality, almost
Hmm.
schizophrenic.
Hmm.
Uh, and we know one thing about the human condition. We like consistency, and when we are put in situations where we have to behave differently than we want to, that we have to behave as somebody else, when we have to act like we're not who we really are, then we are uncomfortable in those situations.
Hmm.
So there's a tendency to want to act consistent throughout. And when I talk to a lot of folks in business, they get really uncomfortable at their place of work. Why? Because they're asked to do things that aren't quite what they think they should be doing.
Right.
And for this reason, boy, you look at the surveys, and you find out that there's a great deal of unhappiness in the world these days,
Hmm.
especially with employees. Something to the range of somewhere 20 to 25% of employees are satisfied with work, but 75% are disappointed in what's going on.
That's a
And
lot of your life to be disappointed in.
so I know work is so important for what we do as humans.
Hmm.
It's how we participate in the creation, God's creation, because each of us are made in the image and likeness of God. God's the big creator. We're creators in a small way, but we are oriented to doing that. And how do we
Right.
create? By working with our hands, mind, and our mind. And oftentimes it has to do with the work that we do, working for someone
Hmm.
else or being in a business. So all of those are very important. You asked such a big, rounded question. I started into this thing, and I'm trying to lose track of where I wanted to go with it.
Oh
But
no, that's good. Yeah, it's a very broad question, but I really like what you said. And I think what we are calling attention to, and the Catholic Church does such a good job at this, is the dignity of work. I think it's tempting in our secular culture. We have this idea that work is just that thing you kind of have to do to exist. And so you get through it, you buckle down, you turn off for 8 hours, and then once you get off, that's when you can really live your life. Whereas, the Catholic vision of labor is that it's an inherently dignified thing that we're created to do, right? Even before the fall, Adam and Eve were called to work the garden. And so that's something that in converting and becoming Catholic, I really appreciated, is that there's actually this vision of our work and the work of our hands as this good and beautiful, dignified thing that we can actually participate with God in. Whereas for a lot of streams of Christianity, there's sort of almost this separation of like, that's a purely physical thing for this world that's not going to matter. Whereas as Catholics, we think it does matter. The way that we do business, the way that we serve our communities in that regard, it does have eternal impact, even if, we're not necessarily maybe evangelizing with every business interaction, but by doing good work and by being dignified in our labor and building beautiful things, that in and of itself is right, like part of our design and what God intended labor to be. So I think having that positive vision is a good first step.
well, absolutely. And in reality, what we do in work is one way that we love one another as Christ loved us.
Mm.
Now, this is kind of the word love is such a complicated term. It has so many different meanings
Hmm.
in English language. And a lot of times when we talk about love, our eyes gloss over. We can't imagine what it is that you know the the homily on Sunday is talking about, or
Right.
you know, and yet, you know, Christ made it really clear in the one case when the lawyer asked him, "What's the most important commandment?" He said, "Well, love God with your whole heart and mind, and then love your neighbor as yourself." I'm paraphrased what he said, but
Hmm.
basically he put those two ideas together, and certainly by running a business, by working in a business, that's our way
Hmm.
of going out to, in effect, love one another as
Hmm.
Christ does. And I think that's where you get into the whole idea of the Catholic social teaching, Catholic social doctrine,
Right.
uh, which is really a way of taking the teachings of Christ and kind of putting them in just a little bit different perspective,
Hmm.
looking at it from the standpoint of four key core principles, starting out with human dignity, the
Hmm.
fact that individuals are so important in everything we do. Solidarity, we're expected to help one another, especially those that are having difficulty. Subsidiarity, the idea that everybody's got a free will
Hmm.
and we should not impose our will on other people. We should allow them to make a choice. That's the way God set up the earth. And then finally, common good, the fourth principle, which is basically this idea that we want to make sure that society functions in such a way that people um, are freed from the most egregious and difficult challenges they face so that they can be open to the message of the gospel
Hmm.
and make a decision to choose to go towards Christ. Um, those four core principles are so important in how we treat one another in the workplace.
Hmm.
So they apply to the way we run businesses, manage businesses, and relate to those folks that are working with us in the next cubicle.
That's great. Yeah, and those are the four principles that you outline in your book as well. Here I'm holding it up for people to kind of see. This is the cover. We didn't do this on purpose. It almost perfectly matches my background. So you and I must have similar taste in color. I realized that when I was getting the camera ready, I was like, this is literally could just blend in.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think those four principles are amazing, especially when you realize that they have to almost be held all together for them not to stretch too far one way, right? Like if you focus too much on you know individuals, you can miss the collective. And if you focus too much on the collective, then you do that at the risk of sinning against the individual. But if you hold all four of those in tension with each other, not that they're opposed or in tension actually, but when you think of all four, that's what actually enables you to create sort of a just system in which everyone can be accounted for and have a just relationship in the workplace and the community. And we've really done this in our business thanks to these ideas, and it's been really pivotal to see like how can I make sure that the things that we're doing for clients is actually benefiting them and actually doing good for our community. How can we make sure that we're telling the stories of businesses that we film in a way that will help their business grow but also showcases the actual value they offer. And I think for me that was the big distinction in thinking through business, of not just how can I bring a product or a service to market that people are interested in enough to buy, and then how can I profit off of it. That's a part of it, but what's the actual need of my community that people like really need to have taken care of that I can bring to the table. um, that's a different way of viewing it. And I think we're seeing companies start to do that, right? Like you see companies like Chick-fil-A that sort of have the servant leadership model. And they really, I worked for Chick-fil-A, so I can kind of speak from the inside. There really was this focus on actually loving and having compassion and building relationships with people, which for a fast food restaurant to do is kind of strange to think about, but it really worked. And the same thing, there was a coffee shop I worked for that we literally had notebooks where we would take down notes on customers that we were seeing often so that we could like build relationships with them. And like you had mentioned earlier, more than just a way to increase profits because it makes people feel valued, we actually valued them and built relationships and friendships, some of which I still keep up with today. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what business is really all about, isn't it? Just building relationships.
It's so much about human relationships.
Mm-hmm.
It is. I think a lot of times when we're running a business, of course, we know accounting systems, we know
Yeah.
engineering systems. We get to looking at numbers and we start managing by the numbers. And what that causes us is to focus on the numbers instead of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And I see so many situations in business where we miss the opportunity to build someone up, to make an effective relationship, to build long-term satisfaction and brand loyalty. And when we miss those opportunities, we don't do as well as a business as
Right.
we should. Um, I think business schools sometimes miss the opportunity
Yeah, sure.
when educating students. We think about. I mean, I've talked to so many folks that have a business degree, and well, you ask them, well, what's the number one requirement of a business? I mean, what's the goal of business? And
Hmm.
so many say, oh, to make a profit.
Hmm.
Okay, but if you look at it from a Catholic standpoint, you realize that profit making is the scorekeeping thing. Yeah, a business has got to make profit, obviously, in order to,
Right.
it's got to score in order to stay in business. But it's all about the service and the quality that
Hmm.
we provide in making effective relationships and building long-term relationships.
Hmm.
That's the whole real goal of a business, to provide the need and provide the service that customers really are seeking.
Right. I kind of want to take that in a different direction. I think one of the things that's become important to me as I've been Catholic, as I've reading social teaching, the popes talk a lot about the just distribution of goods, and I think is it Rerum Novarum? You might know better than me. In one of the encyclicals, they talk about spreading ownership as widely as possible as sort of the goal. And there's all sorts of thinkers that have taken this different directions. But I know in my experience as an entrepreneur with a small business, I've been fortunate enough to sort of live this reality of I own a business. We are lucky enough to own all of our equipment and not have much overhead in terms of debt or anything like that. And I really get to see that, wow, embodying that principle of owning something with which I can build value in my community, um, it's given me a lot of leverage. It's given me a lot of, I would say, respect at a younger age than perhaps I would have gotten it if I was just working for a company. I find myself at negotiation tables with people far more experienced, older, and wealthier than me, but as an equal, right? I wanted to ask what your thoughts are on developing that sort of sense of entrepreneurship among Catholics. Do you have any thoughts about, how to get started? Why, maybe thoughts about why Catholics should seek something like that, um, in terms of owning your own business or joining some sort of co-op or something like that. What are your thoughts on that part of the social teaching, if you have any?
I think it's a wonderful way of getting started in business. Now, I agree with you that sometimes the larger or in the largest corporations, we have difficulty making any kind of change to make it more
Mhm.
effective or correspond more effectively to Christ's message in the world and the way they treat people. Somehow, large corporations seem to take on their own uh, their own direction,
Mhm.
and you can't find the individual that can actually change the direction or influence the directions. It's all done by committees behind doors, and you
Sure.
wonder what's going on here. And I think we're seeing in more in current environment, many corporations getting behind the affinity marketing kind of approach.
Mhm.
Being they get involved in supporting certain groups, and we end up with very questionable business practices,
Mhm.
and they're moving us in a direction that we scratch our head and say, what's this all about?
Right.
Small businesses, on the other hand, those run by entrepreneurs, have much more facility to move in the direction that makes sense,
Mhm.
makes sense to the owner, makes sense to God. So I like small businesses so much more. And of course, it used to be we had this thing called the Sherman antitrust system, and we would um, require more from companies the larger that they would get.
Mhm.
In fact, there were some situations where we cut down the size of companies. I'm
Mhm.
talking about the government regulations. But we don't seem to do that anymore, unfortunately. And for a loss of the things. Now, I wouldn't say that running your own business is very easy these days.
No.
What's happening is our government is applying these rules that are easy for large corporations to live by, but they're applying them across the board, and
Hmm.
so gets to be record keeping and gets to be a challenge, I think, for small businesses that have to be very flexible and don't have all of the resources that larger corporations can provide. Um, yeah, Drew, I know how do you get started in this environment? I guess there's two ways. One, like I did, where I started in larger organizations, learned it from the standpoint of what they were doing, and then formed my own. In my case, it was um, a marketing research
Mhm.
firm, which basically consisted of me and a friend.
Yeah.
But that's when it got started. Um, and so it's easy to go that way because you've got a sense of what big systems can do and how to get things
Hmm.
done. The other way is apparently, as you've started out, hey, get involved, do it.
Learn
You
the
might
hard way.
make mistakes, learn the hard
Yeah.
way, and keep going at it.
Hmm.
I think that's more and more the folks that I talk to mostly are the smaller businesses, the entrepreneurial firms, and they're trying to say, all right, now I've got a question on this, or I've got a question on that. How should I
Yeah.
be thinking about this? And so that was one of the ideas of the book, to try to really address things for the folks that are making a difference in this world because they can run a business that is responsive to what Christ wants us to do in
Hmm.
this world.
And that's certainly like what led me to buy the book too, because I mean, we are learning through trial by fire with our business, right? I mean, I studied English and theology. I didn't know anything about accounting. Luckily, my wife's dad is an accountant, so she knew some stuff, and that's been really helpful. But all of the classic like business stuff, I had no idea. I would say our only blessing was that I felt like I was pretty good with people, which I think gets you a lot further than maybe just being good with numbers and not being good with people. But yeah, I mean, we've really just been learning, and I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of young Catholics, and even some in my community looking to start something like that. And that's kind of why I wanted to interview you, because a book like this is so important to have that advice. Because I know for us, we've sort of bought our business education in mistakes, if you know what I mean. Like some of the mistakes we've made that have cost us money, or clients we've taken on that were either too big for us at the time, or maybe were, not a good fit. And then, yeah, that's just kind of how we've learned. But I think all of the things you're advocating for are really important. One of the things that you had kind of mentioned that I wanted to talk about is you mentioned that, businesses are sort of moving towards this awareness of societal impact, environmental impact, and things like that. And you talk about this in the book. I really appreciate that you view it the same way that Pope Francis has. I forget what the term is, but there's a term of, especially with environmental goals, of looking at it through a human first approach, as opposed to one that we might be seeing more where the environmental goals are sort of at the expense of humans. Like we need to have less children, less people, period. So maybe talk through that. How can we as Catholics still be conscientious in business, but avoid doing so in some of the ways that might be concerning? Because as secular culture starts to do this, it's, they're being accountable to secular values, which don't always line up with Catholic values. So how do we navigate that in the in between?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is Laudato Si, the encyclical that Pope Francis
Yeah.
wrote regarding the environment. And I think his big contribution there is he was talking to all of the folks who are concerned about environmental issues and sustainability, and saying to them, remember, it's people first.
Yeah.
It's what we're trying to do is create an environment where people can develop effectively, and so people count more than um, the other elements, and the plants and the animals in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that we should pose these in opposition, but I think oftentimes we get to this thing about, again, looking at the numbers, and we say, oh, carbon dioxide is bad. So we're going to measure carbon dioxide emissions, and we're going to clamp down everywhere that occurs. And well, all of a sudden we get ourselves talked into the idea that um, breathing is bad, and we need to have less humans on this planet because it creates more carbon dioxide, which is obviously bad.
Right.
No, no, no. This is a conclusion that goes well beyond what Pope Francis is suggesting.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying, no, come on. The world was created for humans to grow
Mm-hmm.
and to learn, and to, as kind of a way of moving through life,
Hmm.
hopefully demonstrating that they do merit eternal life with our Savior.
Hmm.
And uh, we need to make sure that we have an environment that allows that to go on.
Right.
Um,
You
so,
mentioned in the book there's a story, and maybe you'll share it here. Maybe you don't want to spoil the book, but there's a story you
ah,
share about a firm that you worked at that, trying to meet some of those goals, made some decisions that ultimately impacted people in a negative way, by, I think it was moving operations to another country. Can you kind of talk through that? Because I think that happens a lot more than we
I,
think.
yeah, I think so. I mean, we have a environmental protection agency, which in their you know they're establishing procedures and goals that we and regulations that we eliminate certain types of pollutants and
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. And the story I think that you're referring to is it was a brass manufacturing operation that was in Ohio uh, that the company that I was working for operated, and it was running into some problems because brass has always been kind of a dirty thing to manufacture, and it was putting some dirty stuff in the air. Uh, well, we had the opportunity to use some new technology, but it was going to take some time to get it in. And unfortunately, the EPA didn't want to grant that time. So we
Hmm.
ended up having to close the plant down. And what did we do? We started buying the same brass products from a firm in Brazil that had zero quality control to it. Well, we realized that,
Right.
but the pricing was good. So what did we end up doing? We ended up, um, unfortunately, reducing the number of people that had jobs in the United States. We exported to a country that didn't care about environment, and more pollutants were being dumped into the same atmosphere that we all breathe.
Hmm.
Uh, so, in that respect, that regulation did not help in terms of helping clean the environment and do a better job.
Right.
There needs to be some flexibility in some of these things,
Sure.
and and timing and working with companies to allow new technology to come on stream to help these things out. Uh,
Hmm.
I think the difficulty there is, I think, um, yeah, we get so concerned about making something happen by such and such a date,
Right.
uh, as if that's got to be magic. That's the deadline, and um, and then we miss. We end up doing the wrong thing as a result.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that even goes to the heart of sort of the integrity principles you talk about in terms of those regulations, right? There's this metric that they're looking to reach, and the quality of how they get there is almost not as important. They're like, well, in the United States, maybe emissions have lowered, but we've really just sent them offshore, and maybe that's a lot worse because then we're also having to pay for expensive shipping, which also is putting pollutants into the air, right? But I can even
Exactly.
think about my own business, like if there's a, like a revenue goal or a metric that we're trying to reach, it can be tempting to take, like, oh, we need to make this amount of sales this year, this amount of, gross revenue, and by, taking these types of jobs and not doing as good so we can take more of them, we can reach that goal. But has that actually accomplished the goal? Like, maybe on the surface we meet the revenue goal, but now we've, had a negative impact on our relationship with clients, our reputation, or maybe even another unforeseen consequence that we couldn't have accounted for by not thinking through these things qualitatively, and thinking through all the different impacts they can have. I know personally we've had this happen where sometimes we'll get a last minute call for a job and the number is big, and so we'll say yes, and we don't have enough time to think through it, and we've gotten into trouble before with that. So now we kind of have a process of, wait, to do good by our clients, to do good work, and to do good by ourselves even, we have to think through, what's our process to make sure we're doing these things well? What's the impact they're going to have? Um, and that, I mean, obviously that's important for every business, but it can be difficult, right? Because there's the pressure to meet the goals of the regulators or the pressure to meet the goals of the shareholders or to make profits. So how do we sort of balance all of those different pressures on our business while also maintaining integrity?
Sure, that's a great question,
It's
Jim.
another really big, broad question for you.
Yeah, that's a broad question,
Yeah.
and here we really care about what the president of the firm, the leader of the firm,
Mm-hmm.
he is the one or she is the one that has to take charge of this and be really good at communicating to everybody else. All right, here are the values that our organization stands for. And here's how we're going to go about achieving those particular values and ensuring then that they drive our business. And when someone says, oh, but what about this or that? And think, well, okay, here's how this fits in terms of the priorities of what our firm wants to achieve. I think that's the way it has to be.
Mm-hmm.
The CEO of the business is the one that drives these things and has to take charge.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And has to take responsibility when they go wrong often too. Yeah. That's
well, yeah, the buck stops
the buck
there.
stops somewhere. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, man, it's all such good stuff. I think one of the things that this is sort of a personal question because as a video production professional, we often work side by side with marketing professionals, and you have a marketing background and expertise. One of the things that I think can be one of the things I think can be difficult in business, especially looking at the broader secular business culture and marketing in specific, is there's sort of this axiom that marketing is just lies, right? Which I don't think has to be true, but a lot of times, at least with some of the companies we've interacted with, it can be, right? They build their audience avatar, they know who they're trying to market to, and there's almost, especially with the advent of social media, there's almost this deceptive quality to it of how can we make enough impressions on them and say the messaging right to where we turn this want into a need or a felt need, even if it's, not the AC unit that they really need and the one they have could be good for 15 years, but we're going to create a felt need so that they hit purchase and then we have the sale. What would be a Catholic approach to marketing in opposition to that still works? Because sometimes it can be like, well, I don't want to do that, so then I just don't market at all and I rely on word of mouth, which is obviously the best. But at the same time, we want to be able to market and share the value we offer in a way that's filled with integrity. What would be your advice on how to do something like that as a Catholic?
So, as a Catholic, it's very important for us to understand that we do not want to withhold information that a consumer needs
Mm-hmm.
to make a good purchase decision. What we want to do is develop good products and services that really result in the very best alternative for a group of customers or for a target group of customers. And in our advertising, we want to basically point out those attributes as to why this makes the excellent or best choice for those
Mm-hmm.
customers. Where we get into trouble is, as you suggest, we want to extend the product that we have to a whole bunch of other people that this doesn't represent the best choice that for them.
Mm-hmm.
And what do? We withhold certain bits of information from them and basically try to make them make a decision that is a faulty decision.
Mm-hmm.
It's a decision that they would not make if they knew everything that we know about
Mm-hmm.
how the performs or what it's good for. As a Catholic, I think that gets us into trouble
Mm-hmm.
because, in effect, we are lying when we don't give full disclosure of the details of our product and that we're offering.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important. So many businesses, especially large businesses, separate the product development from the marketing thing. And basically, marketing becomes okay. Here's what we got. Figure out how to get rid of it. And
Yeah.
that, unfortunately, in a small business, you don't do it that way. What do you do in a small business? You develop relationships with customers, find out what it is that they really want and need, and then we supply that with the product and service that we develop. The product then almost sells itself. Our
Mm-hmm.
market is just to remind consumers that, by golly, this is the product that's really designed to
Right.
meet the and help them prosper and grow and do the things that they need to do as a business.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. I've kind of encountered that. Oftentimes, we live in a small community where we do business, and so a lot of times I'm doing business with smaller businesses that haven't engaged with high level marketing or video production. And one of the things that we've noticed is a lot of these smaller businesses and firms kind of have a bad taste in their mouth when some big marketing agency comes in and says, "No, no, we'll tell you what you actually need to do to sell this product." Because a lot of the mom and pop shop stuff Like we have, I'm thinking particularly of some like fly fishing stores around here, family owned, just good, hardworking, honest people, and they've had some experiences with marketing agencies that they're like, that's not us, that's not honest, and it might drive revenue, but ultimately it betrays the trust of our customers. Whereas they've built a whole business out of their relationships. It's been interesting to see that there's the sort of classic way, which isn't necessarily a good way, but we're also seeing an emergence, I think, with social media of like community-based marketing and things like that, where people are really trying to build actual genuine connections that result in sales. But really, what it comes down to, I think I've learned, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, is telling the authentic story of who your business is and the value you offer. And that's sort of what our business has learned to do, which is really great because then I don't have to make videos that I think are unethical. And we can sort of talk through that in pre-production, right? Of what is it that your business actually does? How do we capture your core values and the thing your product does that others don't do? And tell it in an engaging and human way, because that's ultimately what people are going to connect with. Sort of like you're suggesting, that it's that we don't have to, and we shouldn't really want to attract the people that it's not a good fit for, because ultimately those are going to be our customer service calls, our refunded customers, and our returns, and all of that makes business more difficult, right? So if we just focus in on who we can actually help, we'll probably be better off anyways.
Sure. Drew, you're the expert in this area, and you that stories are remembered by the people that listen to. It's much more effective to tell the story. In fact, Jesus, when he walked on the earth, he told parables, and he demonstrated the effectiveness of how those parables became then part of the scriptures and were remembered. Much more than if he just gave a list or he gave, specific kinds of information about something. And so I think when we use production companies such as yourself to tell the story of our company or to tell the story of our product, I think we can be very effective at communicating to consumers what it is that we offer. Yeah.
Um, I kind of want to take it a different direction. I think one of the surprising things for me as a Catholic was to realize, and we've talked through this a little bit, all of the different things that the social encyclicals have to say about our work life, about business. And we've talked through some of the key principles. What are some of the other things, maybe just off the top of your head, that social teaching of the church might have to say about business, about our working life, that you think most Catholics might not be aware of or sort of are surprised by hearing? Because I think a lot of people, Catholic social teaching is sort of the hidden gem of the church. Most people aren't really aware of how deep it goes. And I know for me, it was really surprising and joyful to find. So what other gems, can we glean from the social teaching of the church as it relates to business?
Sure. Subsidiarity is really intriguing. It's a term that is not well understood, and it's a term that it's kind of hard to wrap your arms around, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it has such an application in terms of how we treat employees in the business environment. Because really what it says is that uh, individuals want to have a creative space. They when in their job, they don't want to have the job that says, all right, you got to do this, this, and this, these certain motions to put this thing together. There's only one way you can do things. What we've done is taken away the opportunity for individuals to apply creativity to the job, because they're the ones that become more of an expert in terms of what they have to do and how it relates to other people than anyone else in the organization. And certainly management knows what they want to get done, but they don't know the best way to do it. And I think that was interesting revelation for me as I studied Catholic social teaching. Initially I told you I was an engineer. I was involved in how do you do things with the least number of motions to get it done quickly and
Right.
And I had one situation where I was working in a production line setting, and we had engineered everything so it was a pull and a grab thing and minimal motions. Motions were in distance of movement, were all constrained so that it would take the least amount of time. And we had an operator there that was having difficulty getting it all done. Um, but she had better ideas of how to get this thing done than anybody else.
Right.
She was the one that had to do the work. And she asked us to do something in terms of moving the fixture that had nothing to do with anything that we could see, we, the engineers involved in this thing,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of making it so that it was going to actually save time. And yet, what she did is she showed us something unique
Hmm.
in the terms of the way that she operated, and using two hands in one operation where we were uh, visualizing it as a one grab operation that actually saved more time. And she made that work
Oh,
and could
wow.
then produce the line. So I've learned that, the way we want to work with individual employees, we want to outline what the job is, but we want to give them the freedom, the education, the capabilities to make it their own.
Hmm.
They become more motivated employees. They see how their work fits in with the goals of the organization. They want to make the organization work just the same as everybody else, and they become model employees, and everybody benefits. And that's part of Catholic social doctrine.
Right.
It's amazing. When we usually talk about Catholic social doctrine, oftentimes we talk about the social issues in the world, and
Mm-hmm.
sending money to people in faraway places that, are hurting. Well, that's part of it. But really, Catholic social doctrine is all about how we relate to the people in our environment, how we
Mm-hmm.
relate to family members, how we relate to people in the workplace, how we relate to customers. And it really applies to all of these areas. So it's something that that is very appropriate for business folks to study.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really good. Having worked for a couple larger firms, so I worked for an insurance company for a while in their customer care center, and then ultimately as a part of like their claims and IT center on the phones. And there was definitely a sense in which we were just cogs in the machine. We didn't have the freedom to make certain decisions, to the degree that sometimes we had a very particular script we had to follow, which was then frustrating for customers, right? They're calling their insurance company to get an answer to a question, and all I can do is read this one track line for legal reasons, as opposed to actually being able to listen with that person. And there were times when I actually knew, oh, I can make this connection with this department that would actually really help this person. But my hands are sort of tied by the management saying, well, we don't want any sort of legal implications or responses. There was one time when I actually just went ahead and did it. Anyways, but my manager ultimately came back and told me that was actually the right thing to do, even if you're technically not supposed to do it. So I ended up being okay because I had an understanding manager. But then what you're saying is really a good and beautiful thing, because, if we don't sort of shackle the wrists of our employees, and of people kind of running the day to day, they can solve problems that, like you said, we're often not aware of. Even in my business, my wife, having learned to do all sorts of technical stuff, approaches it very differently than me. And there's ways that she's started to do things with like video editing that I would have never thought of, because it's not how my brain works. It's not how I approach it, but it's actually way more efficient, right? And that's the benefit of the communal aspect of it, and dignifying each person. Um, and I think that's really important to the success of a business too. Like if you let people be themselves and think through things and give them almost like a stake of ownership. Maybe they don't actually own the company, but if they feel like their decisions matter, then they're more likely to show up and be engaged in their work, right? Which is better than someone that just kind of clocks in and then just sits in the seat and then clocks out. I think it's just more effective that way too. So yeah, it's amazing to discover that the church is usually, as usual, right about pretty much everything with these things. So it's so good, and I think that as people think through that, I just hope that we can reach people who are thinking about starting businesses or who are in business, even if you're just working, maybe not very high on the totem pole. The church just has so much to offer, and that's what I really liked about your book, is it distills it down. To understand without necessarily having to dig into all those documents yourself and then make those connections. But for people who want to sort of do that research, what resources would you recommend looking into as far as, Catholic social teaching goes? Maybe other people like yourself who have thought through this stuff. What other resources are there out there for Catholic business professionals?
Good question. I would say you are correct. The encyclicals are written for the overall church, but they are written in, conceived in Latin,
Yeah.
translated in various languages. Sometimes the language is a little ponderous and a little bit difficult to read. It's not an easy read sometimes, I
Hmm.
guess we'll say that way. Um, and yet they do provide really good background. And I would say that everybody ought to read Rerum Novarum. That was
Hmm.
the encyclical that was published in 1891 by Pope Leo the 13th. And it's kind of the one that talked first about the role of employment and the responsibility of employees and the responsibility of management.
Hmm.
Um, and it really was groundbreaking at the time, and it's really an excellent encyclical. There are several organizations that provide courses and coursework for people who want to learn more about Catholic social teaching. One is called Centesimus Annus Pro Pontifice. So that's a Vatican organization, but they've got a U.S. arm for this, and they run conferences on how to learn a little bit more about um, Centesimus Annus. That was the encyclical that was written by St. John Paul II that was on the 100th anniversary of Rerum Novarum.
Hmm.
So, and it's one that kind of reviews Rerum Novarum, but then extends it further in many different directions. So it's another really good encyclical to read to get kind of a full
Hmm.
understanding of Catholic social teaching. Um, Gosh, I'm trying to think what else. Again, a good business understanding, I think, can be found in Force for Good, the book
Hmm.
that we've been talking about. Um, and I would also say that I would encourage other folks.
I'll hold it up again for the camera there. Oh, wait, we'll get your name in it this time. There we go.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Uh, uh, this is an area that requires, it's under development, I think is the right
Hmm.
way to say it. There can be some more work done in this area, I think, and I'd like to encourage other folks who are good thinkers like yourself uh, to develop more in terms of how Catholic social teaching informs
Hmm.
the practice of business. I did a lecture not too long ago on bringing Christ to work, because as an employee, sometimes we are working for a large organization.
Right.
It is kind of difficult because that organization is very secular, and ideas about Christianity, ideas about proper treatment of individuals, ideas about what's really important in the world and in life. Sometimes these are squashed and cannot be communicated.
Hmm.
So, one thing to do is for individuals is to, in effect, look at what's happening and at least start in your own office, in your own workplace, in your own cubicle, making that a, um, a place of Christian virtue,
Mm.
and making sure that the way you treat other people is with great dignity and respect. It's the kind of thing that can have a ripple effect that eventually influences your whole organization. In other
Hmm.
words, don't be kowtowed by what's going on around you.
Sure.
Make it convict yourself of the fact that you are called to a higher standard
Hmm.
as a Catholic Christian, and you can do that and have an influence in your workplace.
Hmm. Is there a place that people can go to find that lecture?
Oh, no, I'm afraid to
That's okay.
think so. No, I'm sorry. It was
No.
given by the folks in my parish, and I
Okay.
don't. They did. I think they recorded it, but I don't think they've got it up on their website now. So
Sure.
anyway,
Maybe we'll have
yeah.
to bring you back on sometime just to deliver that lecture.
Just to
That
talk
could,
about,
I
yeah,
think that would
it
be
was good.
valuable.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. One last kind of fun question, and then just to respect your time, we'll let you go. as the world, and maybe this isn't a fun question, I don't know, I just kind of thought of it. As the world gears towards, what Pope Benedict called the digital continent, we're very integrated into our digital world for better or worse. And then now we have the advent of AI. How do you see all of this changing? How do you see Catholics in business and just people in business reacting to that? And what advice or what things would you have to say about that as we go forward into the advent of the AI workplace and the AI business world?
So one thing that we need to remember when we're dealing with technology in all of its forms is that technology is useful if it helps uh, and respects the human person. So we got to make sure that we don't somehow put technology ahead of individuals and human dignity. And I think that's, you say a fun question. I'm not sure.
I was gonna say, as soon as I'm thinking, I'm like, maybe it's not so fun. It's kind of
Yeah,
scary.
yeah. Well, I think there is some concern that, gosh, some of this stuff is going to replace workers. Well,
Mm-hmm.
technology has always replaced workers. We've had that,
Mm-hmm.
and individuals are the one thing about individuals is that they can learn and they can adapt. And I think that that's the amazing thing about the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
We say that humans have this immortal soul. That means that we're going to be around when the rest of the world is troubled and gone.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I mean, I can remember in one manufacturing operation I was involved with, we got a big piece of equipment, brand new equipment. It was very expensive, and boy, did we treat that better than anybody in the whole plant.
Yeah.
It was like hand polished and all of this stuff. And what's crazy about it, 2 years after we installed this thing, it went obsolete, and
Oh
it was,
wow.
you know, and yet humans, even though their skills may be obsolete, they can always learn new skills and
Mm-hmm.
continually improve and be great contributors to the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one way I have to look at it and say, humans, I mean, we can't, no, AI can't duplicate a human
Right.
yet. Don't
Right.
think it'll ever do it. I don't think it'll ever do it, but we might get it closer and closer as we go along.
Mm-hmm.
We will always need humans, but not only that, humans are the most important thing that we have,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that human dignity. And so, as long as we place that first, uh, then AI and technology is going to continue to serve
Mm-hmm.
appropriately.
Yeah,
And,
I tend to agree with you. I definitely agree that I don't think AI will ever fully emulate humanity. A lot of the people developing it tend to think that, but I'm like, I don't think it's possible because you can't give it a soul, really. So there's going to be things that humans retain. And then on another level, kind of what you were saying, it made me think about every time we've invented time saving technologies, we don't end up saving any time. And then we end up creating all these new jobs about managing those things when they go awry. We invent dishwashers and now there's a dishwasher repairman. So we have AI, and there's going to be people whose jobs just shift to managing AI and technologies and things like that. We have factories that maybe there's a lot of robotics, but you have to have people sort of pushing the buttons and maintaining things. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. The adaptability of the human person is amazing, and the resiliency. Right, we're really resilient creatures, and I think that gives me hope. So long as, like you said, people choose to focus on it through the lens of human dignity, and we don't have people trying to entirely replace us with robots. But um, I'm hopeful because at least in our line of work, people have tried to replace script writers, and it's just not the same. One of the big areas is with puns in particular. AI can't make jokes the same way humans can. So at least for now, comedy writers are safe. Um, and that's good, right? Because there's something about the way that we process humor and process language that even a language model can't perfectly emulate. So that's good. Well, Dr. Brian England, thank you so much for coming on and just kind of talking through the principles of your book and Catholic business. I hope everyone listening can be inspired by this to be a better employee, a better employer, maybe a better business owner, or maybe become an entrepreneur. I think my personal goal is that I want to have as many Catholic entrepreneurs as possible. So anything I can say to encourage someone to do that and take ownership either in the firm you're already in or start something new that can benefit the community, I think is good. Where can people go to find your book and find other resources that you have if they want to connect more with your work?
So the book is available on Sophia Institute Press. So just type in Sophia Institute Press, and I think that'll show up. And of course, it's on Amazon as well.
Perfect. And I'll have it linked in the description as well. I think I've actually just started putting it in all of my videos because I have some affiliate links that are down there. And I think I have it linked down there because, yeah, it really was valuable to me. So I appreciate you for writing it, and I appreciate you for coming on. And yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom and your expertise with people. I think it'll be really valuable. Everybody,
and thank you. Very good.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Thanks. Everybody, thanks for watching this episode. As always, if you found this valuable, please share, especially this episode. I think this is something that Catholics can benefit thinking through. Share it with someone you know that's maybe struggling with how to be a Catholic in the workplace or how to be a Catholic business owner. I think it'll bring them a lot of value. And leave a comment below with what your thoughts were with what Brian said, and we will see you next time on Drew the Catholic. Thanks. Okay.